McLaughlin also created the Force Classic Grand Prix Series with rounds in 9 European countries. In 2011, McLaughlin took a central role in the relaunch of the iconic Bahamas Speed Week, which graced the streets of the Bahamian capital in the 1950s and 60s. As chairman and event director, he has guided Bahamas Speed Week revival as it grew from strength to strength, reestablishing itself as a centerpiece of the Nassau event calendar. At the height of his long, impressive career in international motorsports, Bahamas Speed Week revival chairman David McLaughlin has been appointed task force director for the Bahamas and Caribbean of the prestigious Federación Internacional de l'Automobile. You should have done it in Spanish, yeah. International Automobile Federation, headquartered in Paris, France. It is the first time the Bahamas has been represented on the FIA, the regulatory board, the body that is to support motorsports what the IOC is to the Olympics. In order to establish grassroots motorsports in the region, McLaughlin has created the Edukarting initiative, which, with the support of the government bodies and commercial partners, has been established as the first step on the motorsport ladder throughout the Caribbean region. Ladies and gentlemen, David McLaughlin.
Thank you for that, Franny. I have to tell you that was written by Diane Phillips, who's been my mentor from almost the first day I came here 5 years ago. I wouldn't have been nearly so modest. I'm sorry Donald Trump couldn't show and you got stuck with me, but then you've already had a comedian with Franny, so you don't need Donald, did you, really? We'll wait till next week, see what he's like. Okay, formally, Mr. President, Rotarians, Sir Durwood, thank you all for inviting me. Thank you to Keith as well, who was very much instrumental in getting me to come along today. He said it'd be a quiet day. If this is a quiet day with this rowdy lot, I don't know what a noisy one's going to be like, but thank you again. Okay. Some of what was in that little introduction does bear talking about a bit. Many of you will know, some of you will not, that the Bahamas has a long, illustrious history in world motorsport. When I was very, very young, because I'm now very, very old, I used to read about the Nassau Speed Weeks, which took place from 1954 to 1966. And I didn't know where the heck Nassau was. All I knew was that wealthy people in England used to say, we're going to the Bahamas, and that really meant that they'd made the grade and they'd got the money and they were going somewhere very exotic. But as a young racing enthusiast, I got to know a little bit about Nassau Speed Weeks, as they were then called. And I never imagined back then that one day I would be invited to come out here to revive the Speed Weeks as a vintage or historic event and get involved in a country which, again, when I come back now, everyone says welcome home, and after 5 years I'm kind of starting to think that's the case in some ways. So Speed Week has strong roots in your country, this country. We, along with Jimmy Lowe and Brendan Folks, we did 3 years revival, and we did okay. We lost money, but you expect to on new ventures like that. We had lots of partners, many of whom were friends or became friends. Certainly Franny here was a great help in the early days. Oh, sorry, he's not here. He's collecting money over there. So we managed to do three Speed Weeks, which some of you, I know, familiar faces around here will have attended. And after 3, the decision was that either we had some traction and there was some future in motorsport in this country again, or we draw a line under it and say, okay, we tried and it wasn't so good. So the decision really was, it was okay. We got some very, very interesting cars here, world famous cars, multi-million-dollar cars. We got some very, very interesting people came along. Sir Sterling Moss was our patron for the the first 2 years. Sir Sterling won many, many races here back in the day, in the 60s. In fact, at that time, if any of you know a little bit about world motorsport, the Indianapolis 500 has always been one of the very biggest in the world, and certainly had one of the biggest cash payouts for the winners in the world. And in that time, in the early 60s, the Bahamas Speed Week was second only to Indy 500 in the prize money. Nobody quite knows why, and I don't think nobody quite knows where the money came from, but that was the case. And Sir Sterling won so much money, he couldn't take it out of the Bahamas. He actually bought a property here and became a homeowner, and actually raced for some time with a Bahamian race license. So we were very privileged to have Sterling come back and drive here. One of the other people which we were very pleased and interested to invite along was a guy called Rob Walton, who runs a little chain of stores in the States called Walmart. And infamously, my friend Diane had a half page in the newspaper saying, $23.5 billion man, Mr. Walton, comes to the Bahamas. So part of the reason for recreating Speed Week was to get Bahamas on the world sports map. Sports tourism is a very, very big deal in every country, because you get far more bangs for your buck than you put in. It generates huge publicity everywhere. And to get ultra high net worth individuals to come to the Bahamas to race their cars, like Rob Walton, is very good, because hopefully they have a good time, and they did, because it was mostly about the parties more than the racing, and Bahamians do parties pretty well. And it was great to get these people go away and spread the gospel, and it was successful in that regard. Although it's not entirely relevant to Speed Week and what we're doing here with race cars from the 50s, you might be interested to know, as business people, that for every Formula One Grand Prix, the TV audience is 280 million worldwide. 280 million people watch every Formula One Grand Prix. There are 20 of them in a year. Now, a lot of people watch the Olympics, a lot of people watch the Soccer World Cup, quite a lot of people watch the Super Bowl, but those happen once a year, or in the case of the Olympics, once every 4 years. The sport that I've been involved in all my life gives you 280 people 20 times a year. So you imagine, it's the biggest sports coverage by far. And that filters down through, what we're doing is not Formula One. Formula One is way out there, multi-million dollar contracts for drivers and teams. But just to be involved in it and touch it, you get a fantastic response. I mean, just yesterday, the Minister of Tourism here was talking about Carnival and the reach that had and the cost of it. Nobody quite seems to know, but what I can tell you is that I did the sums, and it seemed to me that from what they spent, and they got 900 visitors to this country, cost $14,333 for each visitor that came. But I'm sure he's aware of that. So, I'm sorry, I wish he'd given me the money. We could have got a lot more coverage than that. But they got multi-million hits in their advertising all around the world. But motorsport can do much greater than that. So that's the top end. Now, what I really come to talk to you about here is the other end, grassroots, really, really grassroots. Because, okay, it's nice to have people like Mr. Walton driving their $20 million Maserati here, but it's not the real world. We all know that. The real world here certainly is about getting families together, getting kids aspiring to things, and getting people generally pulling together. Now, Edukarting does just that. There are two shining examples, and I know they'll be slightly embarrassed when I point them out, but two young women here, Megan and Maya Curry, who joined the Edukarting program. and that was 3 years ago. And we were on Guardian Radio this morning, and I did finally own up that we tricked them along with all the other kids, because we told them they were going to come along and join the Edukarting program and drive go-karts. Well, okay, you did get to drive go-karts, true? And you had to work for it, true? And you're okay with that? You're okay, just okay? Okay. Edukarting, it mixes education with karting. So what happens is the kids come along wanting to drive go-karts. I mean, who doesn't want to drive a go-kart? Probably lots of people in this room have driven go-karts at, Disney places and corporate karts and all this kind of thing. They give you a great sensation of speed because your backside's about that far off the tarmac. But what we actually do then is we form little teams for the kids, and we have what we call fantasy karting. And they have to create a team, they have to create a name for their team, they have to devise a logo for their team so they can have t-shirts and stuff. They have to create a budget because we give them virtual money to spend on things like tires and gas and helmets and overalls and all this sort of stuff, all of which I've supplied and we've supplied within Edukarting. But they have to earn the money to make their team happen. So they start with a little amount of money, and then they have to produce a sponsorship pitch. And that's not an easy thing for kids who've not been trained in any of this. A lot of them have no confidence at all in speaking to anybody, never mind actually going to someone and asking for money. And we got some real live sponsors coming along, and the kids had to prepare their pitch and know what they were asking for. And we had, for example, we had Christian Knowles of Aquapure, and he was pretty tough on, there's some nodding heads going on there. He was pretty tough on the kids because okay, what am I getting for my money? I'm getting decals on the cars, I'm getting maybe a decal on the helmet. Do I get anything in the media? Do I get anything on TV? So what are they getting for their money? So what was happening was these kids were learning, and what they thought they came for was something quite different. And they were actually experiencing for the first time how to build a small business, because all of the elements in a race team come together to form a small business. It's not like, dare I say it, basketball or football or any of that. There's a lot of money in some of these sports, but it's a team where you need resources. So at the end of the week, they had to race with what they had purchased. And for example, you could buy a race suit. But what happens is you've got 5 kids in the team and they have to do a pit stop and swap to the next driver. And suddenly you pull into the pits and you realize that the guy or girl you're swapping over to is standing there. They don't have a race suit, they don't have a helmet because you only bought one. So then it takes time taking yours off and giving it to the next one. So all of these little elements, and of course by the second week they've all got wise. So then they're trying to beat the system. Although, of course, we're cleverer than they are, but they worked at it, and I think it worked really, really well. And in fact, we have a really good example, and I'm hoping Ash here will back me up, that we're looking for sponsorship and partners for summer camp this year. The ministry give us a little bit of money, and in fact, Jerome Fitzgerald's been massively supportive of it within what he can do. So we went to a number of corporate bodies and companies a couple of 3 months back, and it was Megan here who prepared the sponsorship pitch, and she came with me to see KFC. And you didn't quite offer her a job, did you? Soon. But I think it was a really graphic example of someone who'd come along for fun and joined up and wanted to drive karts, and ended up learning things that she didn't think she would learn, and gaining confidence and professionalism, and and helping to then perpetuate Edukarting. And we've also subsequently trained, we brought English trainers to start with, and that's of course expensive. And now we've trained Bahamian kids to train the next batch of kids. So they're all gaining, some of them mechanics. In fact, I did a reference for one yesterday who I'm certain is going to get a job with one of the motor dealers here, because he came into the karting, into Edukarting, not knowing what he was going to do, loved tinkering around with karts, and in fact, at this very moment today, he's preparing the karts for summer camp, which starts on Tuesday. So another example of how it's paying off. It's fun, it's rewarding, but it's teaching kids lots of life skills as well as professional skills that they might not otherwise learn. So we're starting again on Tuesday. It's being held at CI Gibson. We don't have a permanent site for it, unfortunately. It's mostly held in the schoolyard at Doris Johnson. So if there's anybody who's got a spare $1 million hanging around, we've got a plan, so you don't have to do anything but just pay up, basically. In fact, we were talking here earlier, the government have agreed to give 200 acres of rather useless land. It's quite useless because half of it's wet, but this is off Gladstone Road, and I don't know if this is a secret, but you won't tell anyone, will you? I've actually got an investor who is certainly kick-starting this, so hopefully we'll get a permanent race circuit. This is a windy European time, not an oval American style, because they only know how to turn left. We're much more sophisticated than that, but it's a little bit about speed week, but it's mostly about the corporate events that will come here, about another new tourist asset at no cost to the government, and they still don't quite get it. So if anyone can, they really, we're giving them a $5 million asset, which will bring lots of tourists, people from the hotels, even Bahamas when it opens. We're going to have drive a Ferrari race experience. Who doesn't want to drive a Ferrari? I want to drive a Ferrari. There's lots of things that we can do with this. We can train first responders, because no good being in an ambulance on the way to the hospital if it has an accident. We can train, so the police, ambulance, fire services. We've got a very, very thorough road safety program, which is a worldwide program run by that Spanish lot situated in Paris, the FIA, and they're really pushing road safety. We have a women in. I've been told I've got 20 minutes left. Is that right? Sorry. Okay, I'll cut it short. It's a racetrack which we will get built. And it'll help with Edukarting. We'll get the kids from the government schools coming along, learning to drive, learning road safety, learning to pull together and work as a team, and then become better and safer drivers on the road. So thank you, through Keith particularly, for your support here. If anybody else wants to talk afterwards privately about anything that they can do, we desperately need premises. We're storing our carts at the moment, thanks to Larry Phillips at the back of Oasis. And that's fine, but we need somewhere where we can work on these carts that's not out in the open and keep the program going. So thank you all very much.